Tonight, I'm sharing 4 stories that will make you question what you see when you look out at a cornfield. The first involves a late-night drive, a strange light moving deep between the rows, and the kind of silence that makes you realize you were never alone out there. This account comes from Eric, who at the time was 21 and working night shifts at a grain elevator near Kearney, Nebraska. His commute took him past miles of cornfields, and he used to say they felt endless, as if the world stopped at the edge of the highway and began again only when the corn ended. It was late August, harvest still weeks away, when it happened. He had finished a shift that ran longer than usual, and by the time he hit the highway, it was after midnight. The road was empty, no cars in either direction, no lights but his own headlights cutting across asphalt and the walls of corn towering on both sides. He rolled his windows down to fight off drowsiness. The air smelled damp and earthy, almost too rich, like the field itself was breathing. That's when he saw it. At first it was just a glow, faint, golden, bobbing like someone walking with an old lantern. He slowed, squinting, trying to place it. It was deep in the corn, at least 30 rows in, moving steadily parallel to his car. Eric told himself it had to be a farmer, though the hour made no sense. Nobody was out there with a lantern in 2023, not anymore, and certainly not at 1 in the morning. But the light moved with purpose, never wavering, never flickering out, always keeping pace with his car. He pressed the gas a little harder, watching the glow through the stalks. To his unease, it accelerated too, perfectly. Eric rolled the windows up. He turned up the radio. He told himself he was imagining things. But when he glanced back, the light was still there, weaving effortlessly through the maze of corn. At the next intersection, he took a sharp right, tires skidding slightly on gravel. The cornfield curved away into shadow. He exhaled, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. Relief lasted less than a minute. As he drove along the gravel stretch, the glow reappeared, this time closer to the road, lantern light shimmering against stalks as though whoever carried it had cut across the field to meet him. Eric swore under his breath. He pushed the accelerator. The gravel spat under his tires. He drove until his eyes watered from strain, until his pulse thudded in his ears. And still the lantern moved with him. Finally, in desperation, he pulled over, slammed the car into park, and killed the headlights. Darkness crashed down like a curtain. The corn swayed faintly in the night breeze. For after a few minutes, there was nothing. Then, between the stalks, the glow bloomed again. It was closer now, no more than 10 rows in. The light bobbed gently, side to side, as though someone were walking calmly toward the road. Eric's chest tightened. His instinct screamed at him to leave, but something kept him frozen. Morbid curiosity, or the hope that if he saw the source, he could explain it away. The glow advanced row by row, each sway of the lantern accompanied by a faint rustle of stalks brushing against something unseen. When it was 5 rows in, Eric panicked. He fumbled the keys, nearly dropped them, then turned the ignition. Headlights blazed back to life, flooding the corn with white light. There was nothing there. The glow was gone. The stalk stood perfectly still, no sign of disturbance. Eric didn't wait. He floored it back onto the highway, gravel spitting behind him, the steering wheel trembling under his grip. He didn't slow until he reached the lights of town, and even then he checked his rearview mirror over and over, convinced he'd see that golden glow on the roadside behind him. For weeks after, Eric avoided that stretch of road. He took the long way home, adding 20 minutes to his commute just to keep from passing those fields. But what unsettled him most wasn't what he'd seen. It was what his father said when Eric finally told him the story. His father grew quiet, then said, People used to talk about lights in the corn when I was your age. They said it meant someone never made it out of the rows, that the lanterns weren't guiding you, they were luring you in. Eric didn't laugh it off. He didn't joke. He just nodded, and he's never spoken of it again. Before you go, if you saw a lantern moving through a cornfield in the dead of night, would you stop to watch, or would you keep driving? And if stories like this keep you up at night, hit subscribe and ring the bell. I post new chilling encounters every single day.
The second involves a farmer working late, voices calling from the irrigation ditch, and the realization that not every sound carried through the rows comes from something alive. If these stories leave you uneasy, subscribe and ring the bell. I post new chilling encounters every day. This account comes from a man named Paul, who had been farming his family's land near Grand Island, Nebraska, since he was a teenager. The farm had been in the family for 3 generations, and Paul took pride in keeping it running, up before dawn, home long after the sun went down. On late summer nights, he often checked the irrigation ditches by flashlight. His cornfields stretched out flat and endless, rows taller than he was, the stalks whispering whenever the breeze shifted. The ditches were lifelines, and he always worried about blockages, especially when rain had been heavy. This particular night, the power had gone out after a thunderstorm earlier in the evening. The farmhouse sat dark, except for a single kerosene lamp in the kitchen window. Paul, restless, grabbed his flashlight and walked the perimeter. His boots sank into damp soil, each step squelching. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and corn pollen, sharp and cloying. Cicadas had gone silent, leaving only the sound of his boots and the steady drip of water moving through the ditch. He followed the narrow path to where the ditch cut between 2 fields. The water there reflected the moon, silver streaks broken by floating stalks and debris. He squatted to clear it with his gloved hands. That's when he heard it. "Paul!" He froze, water dripping from his fingers. The voice had come from across the ditch where the rows began. Low, steady, almost conversational. He swung his flashlight across the stalks. The beam revealed nothing, just corn shifting faintly in the breeze. Then again, "Paul, you shouldn't be here." His stomach tightened. It was a man's voice, deep but calm in a way that made it worse. He told himself it had to be a neighbor, though none lived close enough to call his name like that in the dark. He raised the flashlight higher. "Who's there?" The rows rustled. And then another voice joined the first, this one higher, a woman's tone, soft as if whispered directly in his ear. "He can see us." Paul spun around so fast his boots slipped in the mud. The beam darted wildly, but there was no one behind him. The voices started to overlap. Low murmurs, rising and falling, threaded with his name. Some sounded like warnings, others like questions. "Paul! Paul! He's watching the water! Don't let him leave!" His chest heaved. He scrambled up the ditch bank, mud streaking his jeans. He flicked the flashlight across the corn again. The rows seemed to shift with movement, but whenever he fixed the beam, it showed only leaves and stalks. Then he noticed something worse. The water. It wasn't reflecting the moon anymore. Instead, his flashlight revealed ripples, moving against the current, forming words that vanished before he could read them. The surface shivered, each pulse in rhythm with the whispers. Paul backed away, boots slipping. His breath came fast, too loud in the stillness. The voices fell silent all at once. the ditch water smoothed as if glass. Then, directly from the row nearest him, someone whispered in a voice he recognized all too well. His own. Paul. The flashlight slipped from his grip and landed beam first in the mud. He yanked it up with shaking hands and bolted toward the farmhouse, refusing to glance back. The rows seemed to close in behind him, shadows twisting like arms. He didn't stop until he was inside, the door slammed and locked, chest heaving against his ribs. The kerosene lamp flickered on the kitchen table, the only light in the house. From outside, faint but clear, he thought he heard voices drifting on the breeze. Not words this time, just laughter. Before you go, if you heard your own name whispered from the corn at midnight, would you investigate or run?
The third comes from a teenager who thought he knew every acre of his family's farm, until he found a scarecrow that hadn't been there the day before. I post new encounters every day, so don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell. This account comes from Kyle, who was 16 at the time. He lived with his parents on a farm just outside Hastings, Nebraska. The farm wasn't huge, but it had been in the family long enough that Kyle could have walked the fields blindfolded. He hated chores, hated the heat, but there was a comfort in the sameness of it all. Nothing ever changed. That summer, his father had set up 2 scarecrows, one at the north edge of the field, one at the south. They weren't much, just old overalls stuffed with hay, flannel shirts, burlap sacks tied at the neck. Ugly, but effective. Kyle always thought they looked more like tired workers than menacing guardians slumped against the sky. On a late September evening, Kyle cut across the fields after helping a neighbor bring in bales. The sun was low, orange bleeding into purple, the kind of light that makes cornfields glow from within. He carried his backpack, boots crunching on the dry soil. He was taking the shortcut, straight through the middle rows instead of walking the long gravel road around. Halfway through, he noticed something odd. A scarecrow. It stood maybe 20 yards ahead, where 2 rows intersected in a narrow cross path. Its head was tilted slightly, one arm propped higher than the other, its shirt sleeves flapping faintly in the evening breeze. Kyle frowned. There wasn't supposed to be a scarecrow there. He knew exactly where the 2 were placed, and this wasn't it. He stopped, adjusting his backpack straps. Maybe his dad had put up another one and hadn't mentioned it. But why here, deep in the middle? The scarecrow didn't move, of course, just stood slumped, burlap head sagging. Kyle muttered to himself, "It wasn't here yesterday." He walked closer, cautiously. 10 yards? 5? The flannel shirt looked newer than the ones on the other scarecrows. Dark green, with buttons still intact. The overalls, too, less frayed. The burlap sack was stitched clumsily but firmly, the twine at the neck tight and clean. Something about it felt wrong. Too intact, too deliberate. Kyle circled it at a distance. The shadows stretched long now, making the thing look taller than it should. Its boots were old, caked with soil, but Kyle recognized them. They were his father's spare pair, the ones usually left in the mudroom. That made his stomach twist. "Dad?" he called out, half joking, half serious. The field swallowed his voice. Of course, there was no answer. He hurried on, choosing another row, deciding he'd circle around it. As he passed, he couldn't resist glancing back. The scarecrow looked closer. It wasn't possible. He hadn't heard footsteps, hadn't heard the soil shift, but it felt like the thing had moved, like it now stood half a row nearer than before. Kyle's pulse quickened. He walked faster, then jogged, stalks whipping his arms as he pushed through.
He aimed for the farmhouse lights just visible in the distance. When he reached the next clearing, his breath hitched. Another scarecrow stood there. Or maybe the same one? Same flannel, same boots, same tilted head. Waiting. Kyle's skin prickled cold despite the sweat running down his back. He turned sharply, choosing another row, shoving through leaves, his heart hammering. Every few yards he glanced left and right through the gaps in the stalks. Twice more he saw it. Always ahead, always waiting at the next intersection. By the time he stumbled out of the cornfield into the yard, his chest burned and his arms were streaked with scratches. He sprinted to the porch, slammed the door behind him, and locked it. His parents looked up from the kitchen table, startled. "What's wrong with you?" his father asked. Kyle swallowed, trying to calm his breathing. "There's another scarecrow out there." His father frowned. "No, there's not. Just the two. I saw it. Right in the middle rows." His father shook his head. "I didn't set up another. Haven't moved them." Kyle didn't argue. He just sat at the table, silent, staring at his scratched hands. Later that night, unable to sleep, he looked out his bedroom window at the fields glowing faintly in the moonlight. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, far out near the center rows, he saw the faint outline of a scarecrow. Its head was tilted upward this time, angled toward his window. He yanked the curtains shut. The next morning he ran straight out to the field, determined to prove it was just his imagination. He checked every row, every intersection. There was nothing there. Only the two scarecrows stood in their usual places, slumped and weathered, flannel shirts faded, burlap sacks sagging. But the boots, his father's boots, were gone from the mudroom. They never turned up again. Kyle hasn't cut through the fields since. He takes the long gravel road, even if it adds 20 minutes to his walk. And he swears that sometimes, late at night, he hears the creak of burlap twisting in the wind outside his window. Before you go, if you found a scarecrow standing where there wasn't one yesterday, would you take the shortcut past it or turn back?
The fourth comes from a group of friends who discovered that once you enter the rows, not every path leads back out. Don't forget, if you like chilling horror stories like this, subscribe and ring the bell. I post new ones every single day. This account comes from Megan, who was 19 at the time. She and 3 friends, her boyfriend Zach and their friends Leah and Tyler, were at the county fair just outside Lincoln. The fairground was set up on the edge of farmland, and every year the organizers cut a corn maze into the rows as a draw for teenagers and families. It wasn't supposed to be scary, at least not officially. But Megan said everyone local knew the maze took on a different feel once the sun went down. The fair had been lively that evening. Bright lights from the rides, music spilling from the speakers near the Ferris wheel, the smell of fried dough and corn dogs. But around 10 p.m., the fairgrounds went dark. A transformer had blown, plunging everything into blackout. The rides froze, lights blinked off, the music died mid-song. People pulled out their phones, the glow of screens dotting the midway. The organizers herded families toward the parking lot, but Megan and her friends hung back. They weren't ready to leave. That's when Zach said the words that doomed us, Megan recalled. "Let's check the maze. No one else will be in there." Leah laughed nervously, but Tyler agreed, so Megan went along. They each had their phones for light, and the fairground staff were too busy with the blackout to notice 4 kids slipping into the rows. The entrance was marked by a wooden arch. Megan remembered how different it looked without lights. Just an opening in the wall of stalks, blackness yawning beyond. At first, it felt like fun. They laughed as they tripped over roots, their phone lights jittering over the dirt paths. The corn was tall, dry, whispering with every shift of the night breeze. They took turns leading, marking corners with little sticks or bits of paper so they wouldn't go in circles. They joked about making it out before the lights came back on. But 10 minutes in, Megan realized something was wrong. They had taken at least 5 turns, leaving markers each time. But when they reached the next clearing, one of the sticks they'd dropped was already there. Tyler frowned. "No way! We didn't backtrack." Zach said they must have looped without realizing. He led them down another path. 5 minutes later, they hit the same clearing again. This time, not only was the stick there, but 2 others, the exact markers they'd left behind on previous corners. Leah's voice shook when she said, "We're not turning the same way. I was watching." Megan felt her stomach twist. She checked the map painted on the wooden sign at the entrance earlier that night, trying to remember the layout. But nothing matched what they were walking. The paths stretched longer than they should have. Some intersections had more branches than she remembered. And always, they ended up back at the same clearing. The 4th time they reached it, they found something new. Not just their sticks, but a phone. Megan picked it up with trembling fingers. It was the same model as hers, same brand. When she pressed the button, the screen lit with her lock screen photo, her dog sitting in the backyard. It was her phone, but her phone was still in her hand. Leah screamed when she saw the duplicate. Zach dropped it like it burned. They ran then, choosing random paths, shoving through stalks, ignoring turns. Megan's heart hammered in her chest, her lungs burning as dust filled the air. The corn whipped her arms, stung her cheeks. But no matter how far they went, they always came back to the same clearing. And each time, there were more objects waiting. Tyler's baseball cap, Leah's scarf, Zach's wallet. All real, all identical to the ones they still carried or wore. By the 5th loop, Megan was sobbing. She refused to pick up the items. The 4 of them stood in the clearing, phones held high, their beams trembling. The corn rustled around them. At first, Megan thought it was the wind, but the sound grew heavier, closer, like someone walking just beyond the rows. They called out, begging for help. The footsteps paused. Then came from the other side. Then, behind them. All around, the corn shifted as though something circled. Leah grabbed Megan's hand. Tyler whispered that they should stay still, but Zach shouted and bolted into a path, his phone light jerking. The other 3 followed. For a long time, Megan said they couldn't tell if they were moving at all. The rows seemed endless, the dirt underfoot the same. Then, without warning, they stumbled back into the fairground. 1 second, they were surrounded by stalks. The next, they were under the wooden arch at the maze entrance, the dark Ferris wheel looming across the lot. They didn't question it. They just ran for the parking lot and didn't stop until they were in Leah's car, engine roaring, headlights cutting through the dark. They never went back for the duplicates. And the next morning, when Megan checked her backpack, she found something that didn't belong. A second copy of her house key. Identical. Cold metal pressed against her palm. She swears she never put it there. Before you go, if you kept ending up in the same place no matter how many turns you took, what would you do? Until then, if you enter the rows, don't trust that every path leads out. Sweet dreams.